Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to share with you how I created this cute Valentine's themed triple easel card. Now, in this one, I used 3 different die sets to create the hearts, but you could use a layering heart set that has a bunch of different hearts all in different sizes, and that would work as well. So I have my heart already pre-cut. It's actually a background that I foiled in a video that's coming out, and it was just one that I didn't create a card with, so I used it for this. The next heart that I'm making is one with this Impresslits folder. So Impresslits are little embossing folders that also cut out a shape at the same time. Now this one is has been discontinued by Sizzix, but it is still available in some areas. All the supplies that I'm using I will list and link down in the description box below, so if you're curious about something you can find the information down there. So I mist my paper for the Impresslit lightly on both sides, and then I run it back and forth through the machine. You can see it got stuck in my little folder there, so I'm taking a die pick and I'm gently lifting up the bottom piece to pull it out. I don't want to mar or ruin any of that beautiful embossed texture, so you do need to be careful with that. And then I'm going to set it aside to dry. And then the next heart that I'm going to be doing is this Lovestruck one. This is a colorized die, so it's got many different layers to it, and you build up those layers to create the hearts. I'm only doing the larger one today, and this card is going to have a red and gold theme, so I chose those colors for all of these heart colors. I will do the base of the card in white just for something neutral. But with the colorized die, you're going to choose your colors for all the different layers, and then you can glue them together. My last layer here, this heart, I'm just going to glue the solid heart onto the scalloped heart and then put an acrylic block on there to dry. And I'm sorry, I didn't even realize that this was showing some glare from my camera. From the lights in the room. So unfortunately there's no way for me to fix it other than redoing a whole card, and that's not going to be happening. There's no time. So for the next heart, I'm doing the Colorize Lovestruck die, and I've got my colors here. I've got different shades of red, plus I used some gold in there as well, just to kind of have that glisten from the sides. I didn't want too much. I didn't want all the layers to be in your face gold. So I just did a little bit in one of the layers for this one here. And then I also will use that gold for the little highlights on the hearts. So if you haven't used Colorize before, the cool thing about them is it tells you right on the back of these dies which ones, like which order they go to, so you don't need to really guess that. And then it also impresses where the next piece is going to go, so you can see exactly where each piece lays, which makes it really, really easy to layer them. These highlight pieces here that I have in gold, they are also engraved in there, so it's really easy as well to place them. Some of the smaller pieces you can see I'm using tweezers for. It just helps to hold them a little bit better because some of the pieces on them can be quite tiny there. So there's one little curved piece, kind of moon-shaped piece here that I didn't put on right away just because the part that it was supposed to go on was already gold and I didn't see the point. In the end, I chose to put it on an area where it's not really supposed to be, but it works there anyways. That way that piece doesn't go to waste there. Once I've got all of those pieces together, I'm going to put the acrylic block on there just to hold it in place again, make sure that everything dries, and then I can work on other things while that is drying. I'm using Distress Collage medium to glue everything together, and I like it because I like using a liquid glue because you can shift and shimmy things in place. And the Distress Collage medium, if any of it happens to seep out from under a piece, it dries matte and it also dries clear. So this particular card I'm doing with heart shapes. You can do them with whatever shape you want. You could do oval, rectangle, square, whatever you want. The technique is exactly the same. So my last heart here, the one that is the embossed heart, I'm using some Foundry Wax on it, and I like to apply it with my fingers. Now, if you haven't used Foundry Wax before, it is a liquid leafing wax. The best way to use it is to kind of smoosh it on an area of your table, just to kind of change the texture to what you like to work with. You can use as much or as little as you want. It does dry fairly quickly, so you only want to squeeze out as much as you think you're going to be using, because you don't want it to dry up on you and end up being a waste. Now, just rubbing this onto your paper is not enough. Once it's dry, you need to use a heat tool to let that leafing come to the surface. And you'll notice that when it does, it goes from being a matte finish to nice and shiny. And it's a great way just to add a leafing texture to whatever you're doing. And you can control exactly where it goes, but you can also be a little bit random and a little bit loose with it. It's not a precise medium in that sense, especially since you're rubbing or you're putting it on with your fingers. You could also use a brush if you want, and I've also used this with a splatter brush and put gold splatters on things, which also looks really, really pretty. The cleanup is super simple. Just spray it with some isopropyl alcohol and then wipe it right off your surface. Obviously, it wouldn't clean off paper that way because nothing really cleans off paper like that. But for the surface you're working off, it works really, really easy to clean it up. Once it is dry, you're going to take your embossing tool and you're going to heat it up and let that leafing come to the surface. This particular piece is so tiny that it's hard to hold it while doing this, but you want to make sure to point the heat tool away from your fingers because it does get quite hot and you don't want to burn yourself. But you can see how that leafing rose to the surface and turned out really, really pretty. So the Impresslit heart doesn't have a really pointed bottom to it, and I wanted to give it one. So I cut out a gold heart to glue it onto. You're not going to see a lot of this gold, but mainly the reason for it is to give it a flat back because the piece doesn't already have a flat back and a pointed bottom. The next thing I'm going to do, I've picked some hearts to use for my card background, and I've already cut some pieces of paper to the width that they need to be, and I'm just measuring the die length and then cutting twice that so that I have enough. When I fold this piece in half and put the die on it, it creates a folded heart card basically. So I've got my piece there, I'm cutting it in half and I'm folding it. I like to use an embossing or a Teflon bone folder to really, really put the crease of that heart in there, or that piece of cardstock in there. I'm going to do that with all 3 pieces, and each one of these pieces I've measured the width and the length of each of the dies to make sure that the pieces of paper are big enough, and then the excess pieces can be used for other projects. You want to choose a piece of cardstock for this that's nice and sturdy because this is going to be the card base. You don't want flimsy, lightweight cardstock for this. You want something that's quite heavy and sturdy. I'm using Neenah Classic Crest cover stock. I really like the weight of this for card bases. It makes a nice sturdy base. So I'm putting each of the hearts onto the cardstock, and you may have noticed the top parts of the hearts, the blade side is going off of that fold. This is the folded edge, and I want that blade side to go off a little bit that doesn't cut. So I'm not cutting complete hearts here. I'm cutting mostly complete hearts, but those top little bumps are on the folded edge and they are over top of it so they won't cut, and we'll create little heart cards with this. And this is the start to creating our base. So once I have them all taped down, and you definitely want to tape them down because you don't want to risk them moving or shifting in your machine, you can put it through your die cut machine and you can pull the cards out, and you can see here how it is cut, but those top 2 humps there are not cut. And this is a very important thing for this card. If those top 2 bits cut, you're not going to create a base for this. It's just going to create hearts. So all 3 of these pieces, we are cutting them out, and I pull them out of the die, and I also open them up just to make sure that they've cut properly. You want a decent sized piece on those top 2 humps of the hearts that haven't cut. You don't want them to be too tiny, because if they're too tiny, then they could tear apart easily. So I usually have, say, about a 1/2 inch-ish that is not cut. So there's my last heart here, and once again I am opening it up to make sure that I've got enough there to create a nice base. So the next step here is we are going to take these heart cards and we are going to score one side of them in about the middle. Now, dies aren't necessarily standard sizes, especially when you've got a shape like this, so it doesn't need to be exactly in the middle, but close. So all of these, I'm just measuring the length of them and then scoring about in the middle. If you need to, you can shift it over a bit if you want it to be a little bit more precise. And you'll also notice I'm using the top part of the fold part of the card against the side of my trimmer, just because it's much easier to make sure that that score line is straight across it with those two humps there along the edge of that scoreboard. If you were to try put the bottom tip on there, it would be too easy to have it shift a little bit and be crooked. So once we have all three of these cut like this, what I like to do is use some temporary adhesive, and I've got some removable glue dots here. I'm going to glue everything together temporarily just to make sure that everything sits right, and that we're not a little bit too top heavy on some areas. And the best way to do this is with removable glue dots or temporary adhesive. So you can test things before things are glued permanently. That way, if something is not working out quite right, you can adjust it before you're assembling your card here. Now, the fun part of a triple easel card is you can actually fold everything flat and put it into an envelope. Now, when I say flat, because there's so many layers to this, to each one of those little heart cards, it's not going to be flat like a normal A2 folded card. It's going to be, it's going to have some bulk to it, but it will still fit into an envelope. And I would choose an envelope that's a little bit larger than the actual card size to accommodate the bulkiness of the card, but you could mail it if you wanted to. I personally wouldn't mail this type of card just because unless it's someone that's a card maker and possibly knows how these cards work, it might be a little bit confusing. So I would personally be handing this to someone and then show them how the card sets up, just so that they can really appreciate it to its fullest, because if they can't set up the card how it is intended, it kind of defeats the purpose. So there I've got my card temporarily glued together, and I set it up and it worked totally fine. And this is it folded flat. Now, what I should have done here was taken my glue and permanently glue everything together now that I know that it worked. But for some reason, I just moved on. So I will do it later. You'll see me go back and add some glue to those layers and permanently glue it together. What I'm doing right here is I'm taking that small heart die from the smallest of the card bases, and I'm just cutting the bottom tip. What we're doing is we're going to cut several of these and we're going to layer them on top of each other. I actually layer 4 on top of each other because I want a nice ridge here, and it's going to be glued on the inside of the smallest folded card to give that heart tip something to hold against, to hold it up. It's going to make a little bit more sense once I've glued it to the card and I can show you. So these 2 first pieces, I just wanted to make sure that they followed the proper shape from the heart card base. Now I'm just gluing those pieces onto some more scrap and just layering that up just to give it, like I said before, a nice ridge. You could also just do a strip here to do the same thing, but I find it really, really easy just to do this. I've got those 4 glued on top of each other, and now I'm just gluing them to the card base. You're going to want to hold that while it dries, and that just gives that front small heart there something to prop up against when you've got the card held in place. If you don't have that there, that front piece is going to be a little bit floppy. So you definitely want to put some sort of a ridge for that to hold against. I decided I wanted to use the arrow from the Lovestruck Die set. So I chose a combination of the gold cardstock that I had used in that layering, as well as the red cardstock. And I'm just layering those on top of each other. I'm not putting that on the middle Lovestruck die. I'm actually going to put it on the back one there. It's just going to give it a little bit more interest and keep it from being so plain. You could also take, say, some letter dies and spell something here. I think that would be really, really cute too. But I thought just putting this arrow would be another way just to add a little bit of a different feature here. So I'm gluing all the pieces on top of each other. You're going to want to let them completely dry before you continue and add them to your card. In the end, I thought the gold from this arrow was a little bit too much with to go against the gold. Like gold on gold doesn't really work. So I took a black Copic marker and colored that gold cardstock and then let that dry. And it covered the gold perfectly. And that way you can see the stick of the arrow a little bit better against the gold part of the card. So once that is completely dry, I cut the pieces or the arrow into pieces so that I could glue it onto the front of the card and have it look like it's going through the heart there. So I'm going to glue that down and I'm going to let that completely dry before moving on. And to let it completely dry, I'm going to, you can see I folded my card a little bit weird, and I'm going to put my acrylic block on there while that it's drying, just because we're gluing onto gold metallic cardstock that's a little bit slick and slippery, and that gold will, or that glue will shift and move on us, and we don't want that. So this is the point where I realized I hadn't actually permanently glued my card together. So the nice thing about the distress collage medium is it's got a really nice fine tip on there. So it's really easy to go squeeze it into areas and just pop some glue there. So I'm putting that on the card bases, all of those areas that I had put some temporary adhesive on that I want permanent adhesive now. Now the one thing to make sure when you're doing this is you don't want any glue going past that score line that we put on the one heart. So you need to make sure when you're putting the glue here that it's only going to, at the bottom of that score line, it's only gluing that heart on the bottom. We don't want to accidentally glue anything above that score line, or else it's not going to sit quite right. And we would have to start over again, basically, if we glued it in the wrong spot. So I'm gluing the pieces of the card base where it should be, as well as where those hearts are glued onto the card base. Those are the areas that I use those temporary glue dots. And here we have the card all dried and completely finished. And it's going to be a little bit awkward holding it up, but it's really hard to see it looking from the top. But there is our cute little Valentine's triple easel card. And once again, like I said, this is a Valentine's heart theme, but you could do it with whatever shape you wanted. It would work absolutely perfect. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a fabulous day.